I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 16-8 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities, pursuant to Standing Order 108-2, and the motions adopted by the committee on Tuesday, February 14th, 2023, and Thursday, May 4th, 2023. The committee is meeting to discuss the study on the role of McKinsey & Company in the creation and the beginnings of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format. Pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022, members can attend in person in the room or remotely using Zoom.
Wish to inform all members that all of the witnesses have been sound tested for today's meeting for the benefit of our interpreters, and they've all passed the test. Appearing before us today, colleagues, we have the Honorable Amarjeet Sohi, Mayor of the City of Edmonton, by video conference. Welcome, sir. We have Mr. Robert Palter, Senior Partner, Office Managing Partner for Canada for McKinsey & Company, and Mr. Andrew Pickersgill, Senior Partner for McKinsey & Company, joining us in person. Welcome to you both. We have from the Council of Canadians, Mr. John Cartwright, Chairperson, joining by video conference. Welcome. And finally, we have the Honourable Catherine McKenna, former Minister of Infrastructure and Communities, once again joining us by video conference. I want to welcome you all. We will begin with opening remarks today. You each have 5 minutes, and we will start off with you, Honourable Amarjeet Sohi. Mayor of Edmonton, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me and asking us to join this conversation. Very happy to spare time to answer any of your questions that you may have to the best of my ability. Was very proud of my time as Minister of Infrastructure that we were able to set up the first ministry ever in the history of this country that focused solely on building infrastructure throughout the country, and it was the first time that we had a standalone federal ministry that worked very closely with the provinces, with the municipalities, with the private sector, with the unions, with the non-profit sector to really understand the needs of the community and focusing and making sure that infrastructure needs were being met, and the federal government was a true partner in building stronger communities. Very proud of the work that I spent as a Minister of Infrastructure, and we've done some good work during those times. And we also wanted to mobilize private sector to build more infrastructure that otherwise would not have been possible to be built solely alone by the public sector or the private sector. So that was the kind of the idea behind creating the Canada Infrastructure Bank. So I don't want to take all the 5 minutes because other speakers have, I'm pretty sure, other things to add, but look forward to this conversation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sohi. Next, we will go with Mr. Palter. Mr. Palter, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to attend today's meeting. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey & Company in Toronto, and I have been with McKinsey for 28 years. I'm currently the managing partner of McKinsey Canada and responsible for all of our operations across our offices in Montreal, Toronto, Calgary, and Vancouver. Prior to my current role, I was the global leader of McKinsey's infrastructure practice from 2010 to 2019. On March 29th of this year, I testified before the Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, which has a broad mandate related to the federal government's use of outside consultants. I'm happy to be back today to address the specific focus of this committee on the Canada Infrastructure Bank. As I think you all know very well, the Canadian federal government and the taxpayers who fund it have limited financing capacity. It's not fiscally possible for the federal government to provide all the capital necessary in the form of grants to build all the infrastructure our country needs. As such, having an organization like the CIB, whose mandate is to attract private capital into the development of new Canadian infrastructure, was deemed by the government to be necessary to continue to build vital Canadian infrastructure. The Canada Infrastructure Bank is not a novel idea. There are similar organizations in Australia, the UK, Europe, Latin America, Asia, and many American states. In those jurisdictions, the infrastructure banks have helped develop new infrastructure with private capital. The Canada Infrastructure Bank was first proposed by the Liberal Party in their 2015 election platform, well before McKinsey was involved. The idea of an infrastructure bank was the unanimous recommendation of the 14 members of the Growth Council providing advice to the Minister of Finance in 2016. The high-level concept of the Growth Council was then taken by the government and converted into legislation that was reviewed, debated, and voted on by Parliament and assented on June 22, 2017. McKinsey's first engagement with the CIB started more than 18 months after the delivery of the Growth Council recommendations on infrastructure. We have completed 3 mandates with the CIB, all awarded through the procurement processes of the CIB. Our work with the CIB helped in 2 fundamental areas. First, we reviewed case examples of similar organizations around the world to help translate the enabling legislation into a set of specific operational choices needed for the CIB to accept project proposals. For example, we developed options around such items as stage of project to target, return aspirations, position in the capital structure, risk transfer approaches, and share of capital the bank would consider. These design options were ultimately reviewed and approved by the board of the CIB. Second, we considered best practices in risk management, processes, and organization design from other global infrastructure organizations to help design the organization and policies that were essential to the sound operations of a financial organization responsible for managing Canadian taxpayers' funds. We identified 47 different types of risks that the CIB could face and developed structures, systems, and processes for managing them. Again, the outcome of our work was approved by the board of the CIB. Both these efforts were necessary to stand up the CIB at a time when they had limited people to help them to do so. McKinsey never reviewed nor provided advice on any investment the CIB has completed. As I said in my testimony at OGO, McKinsey is a proud Canadian company employing over 1,100 people in Canada, and we are also proud of our work helping launch the CIB. It is an organization that has the potential to help build critical Canadian infrastructure to the benefit of all Canadians. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. To Mr. Pickersgill. Mr. Pickersgill, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to be here today. I hope I can be helpful as you seek to better understand the role of McKinsey and the Canadian Infrastructure Bank. I'm a senior partner at McKinsey, where I've worked for the past 25 years. Prior to my current role as the leader of McKinsey's public sector practice, I was the managing partner for McKinsey in Canada between 2017 and 2022. I understand the committee's focus is focused on the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which I will refer to as the CIB. While I was not a member of the core McKinsey team that worked with the CIB, I will do my best to answer the committee's questions. I would also like to make a few observations about the genesis of the CIB. As my colleague Mr. Palter has noted, the CIB is not a novel idea. The concept of leveraging private capital to bridge public infrastructure gaps has been around for decades, and organizations similar to the CIB have been deployed in many jurisdictions around the world. The CIB was part of the Liberal Party's platform in the 2015 federal election. It was unanimously recommended by the Growth Council, which was established to advise the Minister of Finance. The legislation that formally established the CIB was approved by Parliament. McKinsey did not create the CIB, nor did McKinsey invent the concept of the Canada Infrastructure Bank. McKinsey was asked to assist the Growth Council by providing research and global case studies on a pro bono basis. McKinsey's role was to provide an objective fact base to help inform the Council discussions. McKinsey does not make policy recommendations. That was the role of the 14 members of the Council who recommended the idea of the CIB. The Growth Council had a broad mandate that went well beyond infrastructure and the concept of an infrastructure bank. It eventually included 10 recommendations across a broad set of drivers of economic growth. Those recommendations included bringing foreign investment to Canada, unlocking innovation to drive scale and growth, building a skilled and resilient workforce, positioning Canada as a global trading hub, increasing workforce participation, equipping Canada's workforce with skills for the future, and unleashing productivity through infrastructure. The CIB first engaged McKinsey in 2018, more than 18 months after the Growth Council work issued its recommendations on infrastructure. That engagement was based on a process that followed the procurement rules of the Government of Canada, and our work with the CIB ended in 2020 before Aaron Corey became the CEO. We have not done any work with the CIB since 2020, and we have done no work with former McKinsey colleagues who have worked at the CIB. McKinsey's volunteer work for the Growth Council is consistent with our long-standing and deep commitment to social responsibility and improving the communities in which we work. I was honored to lead the McKinsey team in our support for the Growth Council. It was an opportunity to bring to bear our firm's global research in support of the Council's mandate to grow the economy and to improve the lives of Canadians. Our firm strongly believes that pro bono work in giving back to the local community is the responsibility of every colleague of McKinsey. And as a firm, we've committed $2 billion to social responsibility efforts by 2030. We have confidence in the capabilities and expertise of our people, who are our greatest resource. We engage our colleagues through volunteering and support them in serving our local communities and ensure our own actions align with our values. In Canada, we partner with numerous nonprofits and a wide range of other organizations that are addressing some of the community's most pressing challenges. This is true in every region in which we operate. As I previously said, McKinsey's work with the CIB was important in helping the CIB operationalize its mandate from government at a time when it had very few resources of its own. While Mr. Palter is better positioned to speak to the specifics of that work, I would like to say that our goal and the goal of McKinsey's public sector work in Canada has always been to work with government to improve the lives and livelihoods of Canadians. I'll be happy to answer any questions from the committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pickersgill. Next, we have Mr. Cartwright. Mr. Cartwright, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks. My name is John Cartwright. I'm the chair of the Council of Canadians, which is one of the largest civil society organizations in the country, dedicated to defending the public good. Our opposition to infrastructure public-private partnerships is rooted in our experience fighting water privatization in all its forms. And I'm a carpenter by trade. Started my trade at the age of 18. I've been on hundreds of job sites, so I know a little bit about infrastructure. Our campaigner, Dylan Penner, appeared in front of your committee 2 years ago to say this: the CIB's current structure promotes a flawed financing model of public-private partnerships, inviting and subsidizing private interests to take control of critical infrastructure and services that should be kept in public hands. P3s are a tool that poorly invests public funds to further corporate interests while failing to support communities. The CIB could play a critical role in supporting a just recovery from the pandemic and support the transition to a low-carbon economy, but not if it remains fixated on privatization of P3s. And he provided numerous examples of P3 failures, and there have been many more since, including the fiasco with Ottawa Transit. Fortunately, the CIB's proposed P3 for water in Mapleton did not proceed. So this hearing looks at McKinsey and Company. It's on public record, the closed-door meeting with top officials of McKinsey and BlackRock that helped shape some of the thinking around the CIB. That's there. What we need to remember is that this was an attempt by the Liberal government to replace the discredited Public-Private Partnerships Canada established by Stephen Harper that required any infrastructure project worth more than $100 million seeking federal money to be open to P3s. But that meeting and the other research and the other involvement is only one part of a continuum where key finance players have worked to shape a more acceptable practice for infrastructure than the crude privatizations of Maggie Thatcher, or Brian Mulroney, or Mike Harris that sparked so much public anger. This dynamic has been driven by all of the key global accounting and consultancy firms. Their goal was to, frankly, more elegantly shift ownership and control from public to private interests. And that's what P3s are about, guaranteeing a return on investment of 10 to 15% to private companies from public revenue streams of essential services. I don't feel they're doing anything wrong. Success is measured in billable hours, in the complex deals that are trumpeted regularly in pages of Lexpert magazine. Just look at page 30 of the most recent edition for the Excellence Awards to law firms structuring the complex Ontario line transactions and so many others. P3s are negotiated behind the veil of corporate secrecy. The Ontario line bidding saw the 25% Canadian content for vehicles mysteriously reduced to 10% so that Hitachi could win the contract. And now they will build all of those vehicles in the United States instead of here in Canada. How does that serve the public good? I listened very carefully to the testimony yesterday of the CIB leadership. These are very talented people. Imagine if all of that talent was dedicated strictly to the public good, instead of being distracted to serve what Chair Tamara Vrooman outlined as making investing in infrastructure more attractive for the private sector by using innovative tools to de-risk investment. But wasn't that one of the claims that P3s, that private guys would take the risk? In October 2022, the Canadian Union of Public Employees published a study by Thomas Marois entitled A Public Bank for the Public Interest. I would urge the committee to review that document and the example of various public banks in that study. They have 4 recommendations. 1, change the mandate of CIB. 2nd, increase transparency. 3rd, invest only in environmentally sustainable projects. And finally, speed up projects by providing financing directly to municipalities and Indigenous communities. Relying on P3 model distorts the focus of what could be a vital tool for investing in resilience and adaptation around the threats of climate change. Instead of funding private charging stations, why not support the vision of the Canadian Union of Postal Workers in putting solar charging on every single post office in every small town across this country so people could rely on electric vehicles while electrifying their own entire fleet? There's no need to bring private financiers in to take a share of the electrification of grids or transit vehicles, and there's no need to have a high-frequency transit service on the Montreal-Toronto corridor be privatized to compete with the current VIA service. I've seen the alternative finance and procurement concept steadily expanded into the full design, build, finance, maintain, and operate model. It's the 30-year contracts to maintain that are the real gravy train. Who can predict the actual cost of running a light rail car 29 years from now? But like the series of change orders in big mega projects, this is where the money hemorrhages. The bids are padded to take risk into account. And if they get the numbers wrong, they file lawsuits to jack up prices, as we've recently seen, or they simply go bankrupt and walk away, as we've seen in the UK. The chair of the CIB yesterday noted that tax dollars are finite. That's absolutely true. And every dollar diverted away from creating public assets and public infrastructure is a dollar misspent. It doesn't matter if the profit goes to a tax haven in Europe or a hedge fund speculator in Wall Street. For Canadians, privatization costs more and delivers less. The CIB should either be reformed to focus solely on the public good, or, as your committee recommended last year, should be abolished and replaced with something truly fit for purpose. But there's a lot of talent and skill needed to build a better world, and some of that is right now in the CIB. Doing it right is possible if we design the right tools for the job. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cartwright. And finally, for opening remarks, we have Ms. McKenna. Ms. McKenna, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and hello to many of my former colleagues. C'est un grand plaisir d'être.
It's a great pleasure to be here today. So I was Minister of Infrastructure and Communities from November 2019 until September of 2021.
Start that my focus in infrastructure was on getting more infrastructure built for Canadians more quickly. At the same time, we needed to demonstrate to Canadians that for every dollar spent, we would receive triple benefits. Investments made in infrastructure would create jobs and economic growth, climate action, and build more inclusive communities. And let's be clear, the investments the federal government is making in infrastructure with provinces and communities across the country are making a huge difference in the lives of Canadians. Talk to someone about their new community center, being finally hooked up to high-speed internet, being able to access better public transit to get to school or work, and you realize that infrastructure is key. I've often said that infrastructure is a made-up bureaucratic word that totally undersells the final product. We need to think about infrastructure as the things we build for the future we want. And I was pretty pleased when John Baird, a former Minister of Infrastructure under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, said that he completely agreed with me on a need for a rebrand. Maybe we'll have cross-party consensus on that. The reality is infrastructure is key to fighting climate change, delivering cleaner energy, promoting investment in our communities, and creating well-paid jobs. When I came into my position as Minister of Infrastructure and Communities in November 2019, the Canada Infrastructure Bank had already been created. I saw the huge potential of the CIB to get more infrastructure built in the public interest by leveraging private sector investment in new infrastructure projects. And this would increase economic growth, create jobs, and support climate action. I'll admit that I initially had concerns with the progress that the CIB was making in getting projects going. It needed to be improved and strengthened with new leadership and a new mandate. And it's great to see that the CIB is hitting its stride. I was happy to hear from Aaron Corey, the CEO of the CIB, on Tuesday, that the CIB now has 46 investment commitments for projects and $9.7 billion of investment capital, with a total investment value of $27 billion. All these represent innovative partnerships between the public and private sector, and will get more infrastructure built in the public interest, building a cleaner and more prosperous future for Canadians. And let's talk about some of these incredible projects. Le projet de REMS, 26 stations.
26 stations, a new transport line for Greater Montreal. That's a great project.
Of electric buses in Canada, in Brampton. As then Brampton Mayor Patrick Brown said, I'm proud to welcome the CIB's multi-million-dollar investment in Brampton Transit. We're revolutionizing transit in Canada with our goal to purchase up to 450 zero-emission buses and put them on Brampton's roads in the next 6 years. Then there was a massive Alberta irrigation project with Premier Jason Kenney saying, this historic investment in irrigation infrastructure will create thousands of jobs and support Alberta's economic recovery while strengthening our competitive advantage. And there was the incredible 250 megawatt Anita energy storage project that's being developed in partnership with the Six Nations of the Grand River Development Corporation, Northland Power, NR Store, and Aecon Group. As Premier Doug Ford said when it was announced, I'm thrilled to see so many great partners come together to build this world-class project that will provide affordable, clean energy for generations to come. The CIB is an important tool to leverage private sector investment to get the next generation of infrastructure built that Canada needs to meet its economic and climate goals, working in partnership with public, private, and Indigenous groups. But I also want to emphasize that the CIB is one of the key tools in Canada's toolbox, as is carbon pricing, to stay competitive with the US and the world in the race to net zero. Canada cannot get left behind. Climate action and economic policy go together. And the world's major economies know that investing in the clean economy of the future is key to Canada's competitiveness. And boy, does Canada need to compete. The U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, signed into law by President Biden last year, is the United States' most ambitious piece of climate legislation ever, offering over an estimated $393 billion in spending, covering everything from renewable electricity generation to hydrogen production to support the U.S. clean energy industry. Canada needs to work hard to attract and mobilize additional investment in clean growth projects across the country, and the CIB is an incredibly important tool to do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKenna. We'll begin our line of questioning today with Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming here today. Now, Mr. Pickersgill, you gave evidence that McKinsey has always been independent from the Infrastructure Bank. At any point in time, did McKinsey share or lend staff with the Infrastructure Bank?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. McKinsey did 3 focused engagements for the Infrastructure Bank in 2018, when 2 of them occurred, and 1 in 2020. Those were staff with McKinsey colleagues and teams, and to the best of my knowledge, that's the extent of our involvement.
So they were staffed with McKinsey employees?
Yeah, just to clarify, Mr. Chair, and Mr. Pelter, who actually led the work, may want to comment, but McKinsey employees were part of those engagements.
And what year was that?
2018.
Okay.
Shortly after the Infrastructure Bank was formed and passed into legislation. And 1 in 2020.
So I'm going to refer you to a email dated 2018 from you to Janice Fukuyusa and Bruno Gilmet. And in it, it's actually recommending, you are actually recommending permanent staff to McKinsey. It says, thanks, Janice, on the below. Of course, we understand on deferring. We've been thinking about ideas on names since you sent your note to ideas below. A former bank, pension, or regulatory executive, John Walsh, former head of OCC, McKinsey senior advisor, so that's a McKinsey staff. John Lyons, also OCC, McKinsey senior advisor, and also you say obvious, Mark Hughes. And then you say we second a McKinsey engagement manager for 4 to 6 months. Now that's different. That's different than the recommendation. To help you and Bruno roll up sleeves and get things done on risk. But generally, given how short-staffed you are, someone like the engagement manager on your mandate work, who you've met, lots of ways to do this, including remaining on our books, but loaned to you, paid direct by you and on your books, comes with occasional McKinsey burst of support like we've contemplated in risk and phase 2 mandate work, or just comes standalone. Can you explain that email?
I can, and my colleague, Mr. Poulter, who knows many of those individuals, may want to add, but senior advisors to McKinsey are not employees of our firm. They're often experienced industry veterans who provide contracted advice to our firm, and they're not employees of our firm. But
just to add to that, the context of that email exchange is if we cast back to the launch of the CIB, in early 2018, there were virtually no employees there, and the chair of the board at the time felt there was a need to stand up a risk management organization to protect Canadian taxpayers' interests. She was in the market looking for people, and she asked us if we had any relationships with qualified people who could potentially be hired into the CIB as staff. And as Mr. Pickersgill's Andrew alluded to, should that come to pass, we would have asked those people to sever their relationship with McKinsey and become formal employees of the CIB. But so it did not come to pass.
So in fact, you actually suggested to a taxpayer-funded infrastructure bank to hire McKinsey employees. That's
no.
They were McKinsey employees at the time, executives.
No, they were not.
You said McKinsey in the letter.
They were McKinsey senior advisors, which, as Andrew alluded to, they are contractors. They are not employees.
Right, but they are associated with McKinsey as senior advisors. You suggested that to the infrastructure bank, correct?
In the spirit of being helpful to the infrastructure bank, we offered a set of names, which, should they meet the criteria of the CIB and the CIB choose to hire them, as they were doing a search for risk management leadership and talent, they would have severed their relationship with McKinsey. But it did not come to pass.
Okay, thank you. Now, Mr. Poulter, you had said that there were 14 members of the advisory council, correct?
Correct.
And how did they get paid, those 14 members?
To the best of my knowledge, it was all pro bono. Nobody got paid anything.
Okay. And they were any of them associated with McKinsey? Were there McKinsey advisors on that council?
I can clarify that, if it's all right, Mr.
Yes.
Chair. There was McKinsey provided pro bono support, as I suggested in my opening statement, to the Growth Council. The 14 members were private individuals, and of course, one of them included our former managing partner, Dominic Barton.
And that Growth Council is what informed the Growth Fund, the $10 billion McKinsey Growth Fund, correct?
No, Mr. Chair, respectfully, I don't think that's accurate.
Okay, so you're saying that the letter of February 22nd sent from the council, sent from the CEO, Mr. Curry, on page 3, where he says that the work informed the CIB's 3-year, $10 billion Growth Council. That's correct, incorrect information?
Mr. Chair, we may be confusing two events. I thought the question earlier was about the Growth Council, which was 14 individuals who made recommendations to the Minister of Finance.
Right.
The government, of course, passed legislation for the Infrastructure Bank. We did do work in 2018 and 2020. I think you're referring perhaps to some of the work in 2020 that my colleague...
Yes, in the 2020, it said that the work that McKinsey did informed the Growth Council, informed the Growth Fund, the $10 billion Growth Fund. Is that correct?
That's not correct. Our work in 2020 was associated with the onset of COVID, and at the time, if we cast our minds back, when COVID hit, the infrastructure industry, like just about every other industry in this country, was turned upside down. Projects were being stopped, labor was not working, people couldn't get on job sites, supply chains were interrupted, and there was a question about how should the CIB respond to that, given its mandate to try to support Canadian infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Poulter. Perhaps Dr. Lewis will ask a follow-up in her next round. Next, we have Mr. Iachino. Mr. Iachino, la parole est à vous. Vous avez...
You have the floor for 6 minutes.
My questions are addressed. The first question is addressed to my honorable colleague, Mrs. McKenna, and to Mr. Poulter. Could you please comment on Canada's infrastructure's gap in general and why attracting private investments and private-public partnerships are key to address these needs across Canada?
Sorry, Mr. Chair. Should Minister McKenna answer that question? I'm not quite sure on what the protocol is when a question is asked to two people simultaneously.
I believe
go
Mr.
ahead.
Yakino was looking at you, so we'll go to you first, Mr. Poulter, and then we'll go to Ms. McKenna.
Great. This is an interesting question, and this is a really important question, and maybe it's
I want to hear you first.
which is why maybe we're here discussing this. I think, as everybody on this committee recognizes, there's a pretty significant infrastructure gap in Canada, and I hope everybody on the committee also recognizes that there's a very direct link between the status of our infrastructure, the economic growth in Canada, the competitiveness of our country globally. The issue that we face in resolving that is it's a very complicated one. Financing is part of the answer to that problem. It is not exclusively the answer to that problem. Infrastructure projects come in all shapes, colors, and sizes and require very different solutions in terms of how you finance them, how you construct them, how you deliver them, how you operate them. Private capital is one of the ways in which to address that. It is a part of a solution set. It's not the only answer. It is part of a solution set which, applied in the right situation at the right project, can be incredibly powerful and produce wonderful results. But in certain circumstances, projects should be funded by the government. In others, there's probably a case to be made that the private sector should do it. And the case for it, as I alluded to in my opening remarks, is government has finite financing capacity. Government has finite funding capacity. And government has a choice, and it's a policy choice that the government has to make as to where it puts its limited capital to get the most benefit for the country. And there's an interesting question, which is, should the government use its financing and funding capital to support nation-building projects which can't be financed in the private markets, and let the private markets finance projects that can be funded in the private markets?
Thank you. Mr. Honorable McKenna.
Well, that's a great question. I'm going to take it down a notch and just talk about what I saw as infrastructure minister. So I would meet with mayors across the country, with premiers. I would meet with folks that are in the private sector, public sector, and everyone talked about more infrastructure. They always wanted more infrastructure built. And the reality is there are limited taxpayer dollars. So there was a huge amount of money invested in infrastructure through the Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, and a huge shout out to my former colleague, Minister LeBlanc, who recently announced that all that money had been allocated. So there are projects going ahead across the country. Money was invested in infrastructure through the gas tax fund. But the reality is there just is not enough public dollars to build the infrastructure that we need. That means clean water. That means the clean energy future that we need. That means electric buses. That means green infrastructure. That means adapting to the impacts of climate change. And so there is a model that can work, not for all projects, but if specific projects where the Canada Infrastructure Bank has a role to play, where the government, we can get more infrastructure built in the public interest. And that's the whole point. It's about being mindful of taxpayer dollars. I'm someone who really believes $1 has to be stretched as far as it can. And so the model here is that you heard actually Tuesday from Aaron Corey, that $9.7 billion of investment capital from the Canada Infrastructure Bank delivered investment value of $27 billion. I think we'd be hard-pressed to find Canadians who would think that that's a bad thing, to get more electric buses. In fact, we actually, I think, should be extremely proud that Canada is probably one of the world leaders in getting electric buses to municipalities across the country through a partnership with the Canada Infrastructure Bank. It's just a smart model, not for everything, but there's a limited amount of money. And so we need to figure out how to stretch it. And by the way, there's a huge race on. And we've seen that with the Inflation Reduction Act. So we need all hands on deck, every tool possible. And the Canada Infrastructure Bank is one of those tools.
Thank you. Mr. Poulter, a follow-up question. By attracting private investments and private-public partnerships, how does that affect Canadian taxpayers? Quick answer.
I will reflect Minister McKenna's remarks. It allows financing capacity of the government to be spread further, point number one. Point number two, at times, private capital can incent innovation. There are fascinating stories of how in public-private partnerships, private capital has incented changes in construction approaches, operational approaches that have actually lowered the cost of projects and improved their overall performance. So it can change the outcome of infrastructure positively when done well.
You're a Canadian taxpayer.
I am.
How do you feel about that personally?
From a personal perspective, public-private partnerships are helpful to filling the infrastructure gap, which is significant and growing.
Thank you. No further questions.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Iacono. Thank you, Mr. Palter. Prochainement, nous avons Monsieur Barcelou.
Next, we have Mr. Barcelou Duval. You have the floor for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. At the last meeting that we had, Mr. Corey from the BIC confirmed that McKinsey played an important role in the foundation of the BIC and that there were contracts that were awarded without a bidding process to McKinsey. They were saying there were, at the time, 1 or maybe 2 McKinsey employees at the BIC, so it does seem that McKinsey played a role. And since then, no further contracts have been awarded to McKinsey since 2020, since Mr. Corey arrived in office. So the BIC started making investments after that, and hopefully you'll be able to answer the question I have about this. The government of Quebec and Ontario have had projects with the BIC, in particular for irrigation projects. Now, I'm wondering if McKinsey provided any advice to the governments, to those provincial governments, when it comes to the investments that were made and the contracts awarded.
So in response to the question, McKinsey's work with the CIB was only on the 3 contracts that you have become familiar with on the investment criteria, the risk management, and then the strategic refresh in 2020. We've done no work on any investments for either the CIB or any counterparty approaching the CIB.
Oui, je comprends.
I understand. So you didn't work for the government of Quebec or the government of Alberta on any files that would have allowed those governments to get any money from the BIC?
To the best of my knowledge, that is correct.
OK, parfait.
Okay, thank you. So 3 contracts were signed in 2018 and 2020 that link Innovation and Science and Development Canada and the BIC. Now, this contract was signed to deploy broadband internet, and it was signed with the BIC, and the investment was worth over $1 billion. Was there any strategic advice received from McKinsey that would have allowed for the signature of that contract?
To the best of my knowledge, McKinsey had no involvement whatsoever in that.
OK.
Okay. I have other contracts here. The Markham District Energy Project, that's linked to CIBC. CIBC, of course, is a client of McKinsey. The investment was worth $135 million, and it was provided by the BIC. And I'll give you another one before I ask for your answers. Johnson Controls is another client of McKinsey, and it had a project, for an energy renewal project, and it obtained $100 million from the BIC. There's also the carbon recycling project related to Shell and Suncor, which are clients of McKinsey. They received $227 million from the BIC. There's also the energy renewal project for the for a hospital in Toronto, received $20 million from the BIC. And in a certain respect, they're also a client of McKinsey through the University Health Networks. There's also the wind farm, the Port Harbour wind farm in Nova Scotia that received funding from the BIC. And that company is also a client of McKinsey. So how is it that the bank has, that all of these clients of McKinsey are getting investments from the BIC?
In response to the question, McKinsey's work with the Canada Infrastructure Bank was 3 contracts. We were involved in helping set up the investment criteria in 2018, the risk management later in 2018, and then a strategic refresh in 2020. McKinsey has not been involved in any investments that the CIB has seen or for any potential proponents bringing investments to the CIB since its inception.
Donc, vous me dites qu'il n'y a aucun de...
So you're saying that none of those investments from the BIC, you know, I'm talking about McKinsey's clients here, you're saying that there was no, that all of those companies, you know, they're McKinsey clients and they all received money from the BIC. So it's just a complete coincidence that there are so many McKinsey clients who are getting money through the BIC. It seems like it must be quite a coincidence, especially considering that the head of the BIC was a former McKinsey employee, and that McKinsey started the idea of having a BIC, and that McKinsey also worked to set up all sorts of policies and strategies about the BIC's constitution. It just seems that McKinsey's everywhere here.
So McKinsey's work for its clients covers a variety of topics: strategy, organization. As I testified at OGO, we do a lot of digital transformation work. We have done no work supporting any proponents from Canada approaching the CIB on any of their potential infrastructure projects.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palter. Merci, Mr. Barcelou.
Thank you, Mr. Barcelou.
Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of our witnesses. I'd like to start with Mr. Cartwright. There have been a lot of claims made about the value of the P3 model, and I note that the Auditor General in Ontario evaluated 74 public-private partnerships and found that they cost the province $8 billion more than they would have if they were procured publicly. British Columbia's Auditor General conducted a similar assessment of 16 P3 projects in BC and found that they cost nearly twice as much as if they had been publicly procured. Now, those numbers seem to stand out in stark contrast to the claims being made by some of the witnesses today. So is the value of the P3 model more an article of faith than an article of fact, or how are we to understand the claims that are being made about this model?
You're absolutely right. Independent audit studies that have looked at the P3 experiences have almost universally said this actually costs more and delivers less, whether they're cutting corners, whether they're reducing the wages of workers or precarity of workers. What we do know is that we used to have a huge pool of capital to support infrastructure investment. It was called the Canada Pension Plan. And that money was available at cost, government bonds, lower than the normal prime interest rate. That's what supported municipalities, regions, and provinces in the past. But the same mentality that said we've got to commercialize every aspect of human interaction said, well, you could get a better return on investment if you took the pension money and allowed it to swirl around the globe, seeking a higher return on investment. And then you could say, we don't have enough money here, so we need to attract private investment. The return on investments are 10 to 15%. Last year, statistics show that profits were 18% of the entire gross domestic product of Canada. So if you're a private investor and you're looking to get 10 to 15% instead of what before the recent spike of inflation could have been borrowed at 2 or 3%, that's a huge gap that And that money doesn't come out of nowhere. There is only one taxpayer. And so if you've got to find a bunch more money to provide return on investment to shareholders and speculators, that's what happens. And that's why the public is losing out in this P3 model, particularly when you add the maintenance and operation. We lose public control over public transit and so many other vital public utilities through this model.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. We've heard from several witnesses as well that there is some infrastructure that should be properly funded by the government and other infrastructure that lends itself to the P3 model. We don't hear as much about the criteria that separate those two groups of projects. I'm wondering, based on your knowledge of projects that have been funded using both models, what is the criteria that tends to distinguish between these two groups of projects?
Well, the criteria is changing. And part of, I think, my view is that there's been a mission creep from the very crude, privatization things that were happening before Highway 407 and other things, which people just see as a complete outrage, to the original P3 model was design, build, finance. Design, build is only one way of doing construction as compared to our traditional, and there's pros and cons. But it's the creep of adding maintain and operation, which strips public accountability and public control. People can't find out what are the facts on these projects they move forward. People are unable to find out and hold politicians accountable. But for the finance houses, for the big people that run consultancies, whether it's direct accounting firms or others, or the law firms that I mentioned, this is a bonanza. This is a bonanza in terms of return on investment. And there was a study done in Europe some years ago that looked at how manufacturing was no longer a big return on investment, and land at that point wasn't, and looked at public services as the next place for global finance to focus on privatizing public services through public-private partnerships.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. Perhaps I'll turn to Ms. McKenna. Ms. McKenna, welcome back to the committee. I'm sure you missed this very much. And you talked about this electric bus project in Brampton, which is indeed an excellent project. It's great to see more of the transit fleet being electrified. But interestingly, this project that you talked about today didn't involve a private sector partner. This was a more conventional infrastructure investment. Why not? There are certainly public transit projects that pursue the P3 model. I think of the LRT project here in Ottawa, which has been very problematic, to say the least. Why didn't the bank push Brampton to privatize its bus fleet and turn a profit so that this P3 model could really start to deliver benefits for the Canadian taxpayers?
Well, obviously, that's a question that's really properly for the Canada Infrastructure Bank. And I would say it's a great pleasure to be back. Maybe not every day, but look, I think that what that demonstrates, though, is that the CIB can take different approaches. And I think that's really important because we're going to have to figure out how we're going to get a ton of infrastructure built. It's estimated $3 trillion is the cost to transition to a clean energy future globally. And that's a huge cost. And we need to figure out the different models to do that. And so if you look at the program that the Canada Infrastructure Bank has for electric buses, I mean, it's actually managing to electrify buses across the country at a rate that would not be possible without the Canada Infrastructure Bank. But as you point out, this isn't like a traditional public-private partnership. So the bank clearly is looking at different opportunities and its flexibility. And one thing I want to point out, because I think it's extremely important, and it was certainly important to me when I was minister, that the bank look at doing investments in Indigenous infrastructures in partnership with Indigenous peoples, where Indigenous peoples have an equity stake. So I think that this is a real opportunity for Canada to think outside the box.
Thank you.
It's interesting. I just want to point out that other countries are looking at this model, that if you look at the UK, they have created an infrastructure bank based on Canada's model because they see it as a huge opportunity to get more infrastructure built too.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKenna. Next, we'll go to Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours once again. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Now, my question again is for Mr. Poulter. When Mr. Curry was here, he testified that the 2020 contract went beyond COVID, and I'm going to turn to his letter of February 22nd, 2023, and in it he stated that McKinsey and Company was retained in May 2020 to provide strategic advice to inform strategic planning in response to the coronavirus pandemic and CIB's role in supporting Canada's economic recovery by investing in infrastructural projects that promote economic growth and the transition to the net zero economy. And then it says this work informed the CIB's 3-year, $10 billion growth plan that was announced in October 2020. Was Mr. Corey incorrect when he wrote that in 2023?
McKinsey's work in 2020 was initially started to help formulate the response on COVID, energy transition, and sustainability. The work didn't complete. It was intended to go across 3 different phases of work. We only finished the first phase of work.
But did it inform the growth fund, McKinsey's work? Did it inform the $10 billion growth fund that Mr. Corey alluded to in this letter?
I am not in a position to answer that question because we didn't finish the work. So I don't know what happened between our first phase, which we did complete, and ultimately that submission.
So how did Mr. Corey say that it informed the growth fund? So you're saying that because there's no way of you to confirm that?
That is what I'm saying.
Okay. All right. You stated that McKinsey senior executives are independent contractors. Do you have any policies in place that would prevent these independent contractors from consulting with companies that are seeking funding from the CIB?
I'm happy to take the question, Mr. Chair. I think we're referring to senior advisors of our firm,
Yes.
which are seasoned executives that work part-time on a contract basis, sometimes 10, 20% of their time. They have a portfolio of things to provide expertise to our clients. As I mentioned earlier, they're contractors, and they're bound by an agreement, and when they leave, whoever hires them would, of course, run through any, if they're hired, any normal process.
No, I'm talking about when they're there. Do you have any policies that would prevent them from having clients that will seek funding from the CIB?
The answer to the question is yes, we do.
You do?
We take our conflict of interest obligations very seriously and our policies very seriously. Our senior advisors are bound by a policy governing their conflict of interest conduct and declaring what their conflicts have to be.
Okay. The public is very concerned about the level of coziness between the bank and McKinsey. McKinsey, in their contract proposal with the bank, talked about how they were the most suited to work with the bank. And here's a direct quote. "We have a deep understanding of the CIB and the important context surrounding it. We clearly understand the objectives of the infrastructure bank from our work with the CIB, our extensive involvement in Canadian infrastructure ecosystem, and our extensive involvement with other similar organizations." Can you expand on where that deep understanding comes from?
I'm happy to address the question. McKinsey has the #1 rated infrastructure advisory practice as assessed independently by Kennedy Consulting. It's a firm that evaluates all of the consulting firms globally and provides a ranking for them. As with all consulting practices, our work comes from a combination, our ranking and our status and our knowledge.
I'm sorry, Mr. Paul, I'm speaking specifically about why it was stated that McKinsey has a deep understanding of the CIB in 2018 at the early inception.
Point of order.
Yes,
Chair,
Mr. Iacono.
I would like to hear some of the responses.
Well, I would.
And,
Okay,
excuse
go ahead.
me, point of order.
Yes.
Thank you. It's more than once now that a question is being asked, and while he's starting to give an answer and starting to get into his answer, all of a sudden there's another question. Just point of order. Sorry, point of order. Thank you.
Yelling doesn't
Point of order. Don't
prevent
be
me from
rude.
doing my job, sir.
Mr. Chair.
Yelling at me will not prevent me from doing my job. That's not a point
I'd
of
like
order.
to hear the response.
That's not a point of order,
Thank
Mr.
you,
Chair.
Iacono.
Not right for interpreters.
That isn't.
So one person should speak at a time unless you want
we
to
know
be
the procedure, Ms.
That isn't
O'Connell.
the point of
Thank
order.
you.
What
So
I will
please
do
stop
is simply just
speaking.
remind all colleagues, for the benefit of our interpreters, that we do not speak over each other, and we also ensure that we let the witnesses respond, and that's a reminder to all colleagues. Dr. Lewis, I've stopped your time. You still have a minute left.
Thank you. I have the floor. Thank you very much. So as I was saying, it's interesting how early on, right at the beginning, that McKinsey could say that they have an intimate understanding of the CIB. So I'm not speaking about McKinsey's general knowledge. I'm speaking about this specific comment that it said that they have an intimate understanding of the CIB. Where did that intimate, deep understanding come from?
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, the Canada Infrastructure Bank was stood up through an act of Parliament in 2017. It was a public record. It went through parliamentary hearings. Knowledge of the Infrastructure Bank was in the public record. And I believe we're speaking to our expertise globally, as Mr. Palter described, and our knowledge of other markets. And that's why we were approached by the chair in through a process that, as we heard from Mr. Corey, was competitive based on our expertise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pickersgill, and thank you, Dr. Lewis. Next, we'll go to Ms. O'Connell. Ms. O'Connell, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses being here today. Mr. Palter, Mr. Pickersgill, I just want to go over a few things, a few of the testimony, because there were several interruptions. So I just want to make sure that everything is on the record and very clear. So in terms of conflict of interest for executives, whether they're contract employees or employees themselves, you made it very clear that when it came to the CIB actually awarding grant or contracts or partnerships with anyone, you and your firm, contract employees or not, were not involved in any of the awarding of CIB projects and proponents.
That is correct.
Right. So there couldn't be a conflict when you had nobody working with the CIB in its determination of where to award projects, et cetera.
Correct.
Thanks. In terms of the email that was referred to about names being provided as potential people to hire for CIB when they were getting started, none of the names you were provided were actually hired by the CIB.
Correct.
So again, no conflict because the names you provided were taken maybe under advisement but never actually hired. Got it. You spoke to the 3 contracts in total, and they ended in 2020. And again, they were very specific to investment structure, risk assessment, and a strategic refresh. Nothing to do with actual awarding of any projects or partnerships on behalf of the CIB.
Correct.
Wow. And in terms of the actual work itself, or the idea around the infrastructure bank, I spoke about this on Tuesday as well. I was a member of the finance committee. We also conducted a study at the time of looking at economic growth opportunities. And actually in that study, the finance committee traveled, spoke with many, and the idea around infrastructure banks was something that the committee also talked about. We had no involvement with McKinsey in part of the finance study. Can you confirm that?
That is correct. And as I alluded to in my opening remarks, it's not a novel idea and it's not McKinsey's idea.
Absolutely. And then also it was in the 2015 Liberal Party platform about the idea of infrastructure bank, or it might have been phrased in a different way, but it wasn't actually the Growth Council. It was an idea that was presented previously in the Liberal platform. Did McKinsey have any involvement in designing the Liberal Party platform in 2015?
No.
So let me get this straight. You're the #1 ranked infrastructure kind of consulting firm, so to speak. If you had involvement in 3 contracts to set up generally the structure, organization, boards. I get it. That happens all the time in terms of, probably figuring out structure, hiring, and those sorts of initial structures within a board. You had no involvement on either side, your other clients or the bank. You had no employees that even you recommended were not hired by the bank. You didn't have a conflict of interest because your executives never made any recommendations in terms of where projects were awarded, but you provide expertise to municipalities, probably provincial governments, probably private organizations, because you're the #1 ranked consulting firm on infrastructure.
Yes.
So I don't really see the grand scandal that the Conservative Party seems to think there is. They can't seem to connect. In fact, we heard on Tuesday that since any of those former McKinsey employees, who, by the way, were not McKinsey employees and then automatically went to the bank. In fact, many of them had significant infrastructure careers. Aaron Corey worked for Infrastructure Ontario after McKinsey and then to the bank, that since anyone with those McKinsey previous employment, actually there's been no more contracts with McKinsey since that time. Can you confirm that?
Correct.
So it doesn't appear to be a whole lot here in terms of the loose connections that the Conservatives seem to be trying to build here. And instead, I'd actually like to talk about, now that we have that all clarified and on the record, I'd actually like to talk about some of your strategic refresh work that you did. Because it's been acknowledged by everyone that the initial infrastructure bank setting it up, changes needed to happen to kind of get it moving. Can you maybe talk about some of the recommendations on the strategic refresh?
Unfortunately, we do not have time to hear that.
Okay, well, maybe on another round.
Perhaps in another round.
Thank you.
Ms. O'Connell. Prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Next, we have Mr. Barcelou-Duval. You have the floor for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'll ask a question to Mr. Sohi. Now, Mr. Sohi, you were Minister of Infrastructure at the time when the BIC was set up. At the last meeting of this committee that we had, Mr. Corey admitted to the committee that when the BIC was being set up and had very few employees, they gave contracts to McKinsey to help them sort of get set up, get organized, and that those contracts were sole source. There was no competitive process. So, Mr. Sohi, were you aware of that at the time?
Apologies, Mr. Sohi. I believe you're on mute.
Yeah, can you briefly repeat your question, please?
We can hear you, sir.
Yeah, can you repeat your question, please?
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, est-ce que vous pouvez...
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, could you repeat the question? And I will give you an extra 25 seconds. Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Sohi, what I was saying is that at the time when the BIC was just being set up and only had 1 or 2 employees, the Bank of Infrastructure, the Infrastructure Bank, and this is Mr. Corey who said this, decided to give contracts, sole source contracts, to McKinsey in 2018. So I'm wondering if you were aware of that at the time. Were there any discussions among ministers or with you at that time?
So the way the Canada Infrastructure Bank is structured, that the day-to-day decisions are made by the Infrastructure Bank, independent of the Infrastructure Ministry, and so those decisions would have been made by them, not by the Ministry.
Donc vous auriez...
So you were not personally aware of that?
No.
OK, merci.
Thank you. But as Minister of Infrastructure, if I'm not mistaken, in 2018, you gave a contract worth $9.6 million to McKinsey to develop a national infrastructure strategy. So that's almost $10 million for a national infrastructure strategy. That seems like a lot of money to me. I imagine you were aware of that?
So I don't know the details. That will be the administration, but I can tell you that in 2016 or 2015, end of 2015, when we got elected, we made a huge commitment to put together $180 billion infrastructure plan to help support municipalities and provinces build the infrastructure necessary, and was a standalone ministry that we need to establish. So we did engage a lot of expertise how to do it, and we did a lot of consultation with the private sector, public sector unions, and nonprofit sector to understand
Thank you
what
very much.
Infrastructure plan should look like. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sohi. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cartwright, one of the interesting aspects of this whole P3 debate is the concept of risk. And we often hear from advocates of P3s that P3s allow the transfer of risk off the public sector and onto the private sector. And yet at our last meeting, Mr. Corey, the CEO of the Infrastructure Bank, said that the bank was considering a $655 million investment in a power line in order to transfer risk from the private sector to the public sector, to quote, de-risk the project. What does the record say about risk transfer and public-private partnerships?
I think there's a variety of experiences, but largely what happens is one of two things. The proponents, and they're largely consortia, and this is important to understand how big these projects have become and why it's many often global firms that are bidding on infrastructure here in Canada. The proponents have to put in extra costs to take into account the unknown. So when you've got a construction contract, that's one kind of thing. When you're talking about taking over the entire maintenance and operation of then you increase the unknown. So you pad the numbers to go in. And if something happens, they come back to governments and say, I'm sorry, our hand is out, we want money back. And we just saw that happen with the crosstown line in Ontario. We saw in the UK, when they decided it was too much, they just went bankrupt and walked away. We saw that with the Hamilton sewage situation, where a private P3 was put together and it changed hands 3 times. We've seen that with Highway 407, where there's supposed to be the risk to say, we'll make sure that trucks can operate on 407 so we can support our manufacturing industry. And then when it didn't suit them and they priced it out of the market, they were forgiven $1 billion penalty they should have paid in order to serve the public interest. And so time after time after time, you see that the setup works in theory one way and in reality a very different way. And the public interest is not served. This bank should go back and focus its investment in supporting public enterprise and public assets.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Muse, followed by Mr. Jennis. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours.
Sure. Just a question for former Minister McKenna. Maybe you can elaborate on the due diligence that was done when you were the minister responsible for the bank to ensure that McKinsey & Company wasn't inappropriately benefiting from the deep relationship. We certainly heard about that over the course of this meeting.
The bank is an independent arm's length Crown corporation, so it makes its own decisions. That's a very important principle. So any questions with respect to that, I think should go to the Canada Infrastructure Bank.
What did you do as the minister responsible to make sure that there was that due diligence done?
Well, they're an independent arm's length bank, but I will tell you that I was very, very clear that they needed to get projects done. When I came in, there was the REM project, but that was it. Given that as a government, we were committed to getting infrastructure built across the country as much as possible, as quickly as possible, that was really my focus. And as I said, it's great to see that the Canada Infrastructure Bank has hit its stride and is getting more infrastructure built, leveraging more money, and doing it a lot faster than it was doing before.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Muse. Mr. Pickersgill, it's good to see you because, frankly, you've been hard to find. We wanted to have you appear at the Government Operations Committee to report on the important study we're doing there. I'm not sure if you had declined that invitation or just not responded to it, but I think we would still like to hear you at the Government Operations Committee. Nonetheless, I'm glad I was able to find you here at the Transport Committee because I think you are a very important piece in this puzzle in terms of the relationship that existed between the government, McKinsey, and various other institutions. Could you tell us what your relationship was with Kelly Murdoch at PSPC and what kind of contact you had with this person?
Mr. Chair, just maybe a point of clarification, just since there was a question of my willingness to appear here. I'm appearing in front of the TRANS committee, enthusiastic to share whatever I can on this topic. And
that wasn't the question, but while we're on it, are you prepared to appear at the Government Operations Committee?
I've never actually received a formal invitation to appear in front of the OGO committee. As I think the committee may know, McKinsey provided 2 hours of testimony in the OGO committee and provided 90,000 pages of unredacted documents.
I know, but there were multiple questions that he couldn't answer because they were dealing with the time when you were the managing partner of McKinsey. So let's move on. You said you haven't received an invitation from OGO. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
I've not received any invitation from the OGO committee.
Okay. All right. Well, we can certainly follow up with the chair. But back to my original question, which was about your relationship with Kelly Murdoch at PSPC. Could you respond on that point, please?
I don't recall the name Kelly Murdoch.
Okay. You don't recall having meetings with this person?
To the best of my knowledge, I just don't recall the name. I'm sorry.
Okay. Kevin D'Entremont at McKinsey?
Well, Kevin D'Entremont is a colleague of McKinsey and Company, yes.
Okay. We have emails sent from Mr. D'Entremont to Kelly Murdoch that were obtained through ATIP. They offer that, quote, Andrew Pickersgill is our Canadian managing partner, and he has been collaborating with the industry and government on this topic. Andrew also led our Canadian team in supporting Don Barton on the Finance Minister's Advisory Council. Through Andrew, I'd be happy to pull in experts for a briefing. This is part of an email from Kevin to Kelly pitching work that McKinsey could do for the Government of Canada. Is it fair to say that you were involved in pitches to the Government of Canada for selling McKinsey services to the government?
Mr. Chair, McKinsey follows all procurement processes when responding to inquiries for the Government of Canada. With respect to that specific message, I don't know the details, but I do know it was mentioned before, so I have gone back and we've had to taken a look. My understanding is this was a meeting in 2020 around the time of COVID. McKinsey was interacting with many organizations, governments, and businesses about some of the factors we're seeing around how COVID played out in terms of economic scenarios.
But I only have limited time, and I don't want you to talk out the clock. You were involved in meetings with the Government of Canada at which you were pitching services for that you wanted the Government of Canada to purchase.
Mr. Chair, I don't believe that is correct. I think when we look at the records of that meeting, we're doing anything other than sharing information about global scenarios around COVID. There was no work that followed, no ask for work, and the fact that
you did do consulting work for the Government of Canada. You got over $100 million of contracts. But so are you saying you met with the government, you had conversations that were unrelated to pitches, and then somehow over here you ended up with over $100 million in contracts? Is that the contention?
10-second response.
Mr. Chair, I'm saying that when the Government of Canada reaches out and asks for advice and help, McKinsey follows the relevant procurement processes to get engaged.
But that wasn't the question.
And any description of my background is actually required by the Government of Canada because it's relevant information.
Yeah, but that wasn't the question at all.
Thank you very much, Mr.
Right? It wasn't remotely the
Mr.
question.
Next, we will go to Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers, you have the floor. 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome to all of our witnesses. And it's good to see former Minister Zoe and McKenna on the line. And I'll get to you in a second, Ms. McKenna, with a question. But first of all, for Mr. Poulter and Mr. Pickersgill, clearly it's been declared here today and that you guys are leaders in your work you do, and your expertise is admirable. So how do you feel about the fact that, with a $9 billion investment by the Government of Canada, we're now engaged in $27 billion in infrastructure work projects, 40-something projects. What's your take on that, Mr. Poulter?
I think it's an indication that the mandate of the Infrastructure Bank as established by the Government of Canada is working.
Thank you very much. Mr. Pickersgill, you want to comment? Or?
I defer to my colleague who's more of an expert on infrastructure.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, obviously, then we're on the right track, obviously, with CIB. Ms. McKenna, in 2020, when Mr. Corey was appointed at CIB, you were quoted as saying, the Canadian Infrastructure Bank has an important role to play in Canada's economic recovery and expanding Canada's ambitions our ambition to build more sustainable infrastructure and clean energy. He also said, I am pleased with the bank's announcement of Mr. Corey as its new CEO, as he has extensive experience in getting innovative and large-scale infrastructure projects built. Our government is looking to Mr. Corey to deliver on the bank's $10 billion growth plan that will create 60,000 jobs across the country, connect more homes and business to high-speed internet, strengthen Canadian agriculture, and accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy. So, Ms. McKenna, do you still stand by that statement and agree that Mr. Corey is qualified for his position at the CIB?
Well, I look at everything based on outcomes, and certainly by outcomes, he's done a great job. He noted on Tuesday that the CIB has 46 investment commitments and $9.7 billion of investment capital that is leveraging value of $27 billion. So I was pretty clear at the beginning. I was like, okay, this bank has to do more projects and it has to do it now. And we're relying on this in particular because COVID was obviously really hurting Canadians, and we had very big concerns about the economy and getting things going. That was across the infrastructure portfolio. So I certainly put the gears there to get things done. But I think he's done a great job. And I would note that he was CEO at Metrolinx, and Metrolinx has a good track record of getting major infrastructure, public transit projects built. And one of the things that I'm really pleased to see is the emphasis on climate action. I don't think that'll surprise anyone. That is something extraordinarily important to me and to Canadians, and also to our economy and winning in the net zero future. And seeing all the project on zero emission buses, but the Darlington small modular reactor, retrofits projects, battery projects, storage projects with Indigenous peoples. I think those are all great and show that the bank is now hitting its stride.
So that sounds like a good news story to me. So when you look at the work that was done in setting up the CIB and directing the bank to invest $10 billion over the next 3 years in strategic initiatives, as some of you just mentioned, of course, and in partnership with some of the other Indigenous groups and communities, you made certain statements around that, which were, I think, always true today. Could you please tell the committee if you still agree with some of your statements as the strong partnership that we created with some of the Indigenous communities and the work that we're doing in certainly in rural Canada with small communities as well? Ms. McKenna?
That's a great question. And I appreciate Mr. Cartwright. I should say that, I mean, I think we do have to be careful with public-private partnerships, and we need to make sure that we get value for money and get things built in the most effective way. And that means that they have to work, and there has to be benefits to Canadians. So I just wanted to point out that, I mean, if you look at the energy storage project, the Oneida energy storage project, that's a great example of a partnership. That's a great example of a partnership with an Indigenous community. I do want to correct something. I apologize that Aaron Corey, I believe, was CEO of Infrastructure Ontario. There's a big difference. But he did do major projects, transportation projects. He was involved with that, too.
Thank you very much, Ms. McKenna, and thank you, Mr. Rogers. We'll have our last round of questioning, and we'll begin that with Mr. Jennis. Mr. Jennis, the floor is yours once again. You have 5 minutes.
Very directly, Mr. Pickersgill, did you participate in meetings with the Government of Canada at which McKinsey products or services were pitched?
Mr. Chair, McKinsey doesn't pitch in the Government of Canada. We respond to requests for proposal. We describe our expertise. We follow all procurement guidelines.
Right. So this is what McKinsey calls selling without selling.
Mr. Chair, as I said, we follow all relevant procurement guidelines.
Sorry, that wasn't my question. This is what McKinsey calls selling without selling, right? Which is where you go into a meeting, you talk about your expertise, you talk about the work you've done for other clients, and then the purpose of those meetings is to demonstrate your expertise in pursuit of potential business.
Mr. Chair, it is normal course for occasionally government leaders to reach out and ask for a range of opinions from advisors from other places, and that's done by the professional civil service. And it's
Sorry,
also
I'm not even saying there's anything wrong yet. I'm just asking. Did you attend meetings at which the goal was to present McKinsey as a desirable vendor to the government of Canada?
Mr. Chair, when invited to describe our credentials and our expertise, of course I do that.
So you participated in meetings at which that was an objective?
Mr. Chair, I'll say again, we follow the procurement rules for the government of Canada.
Chair, could you bring the
Point
witness
of
to order?
order.
He has an obligation to answer the questions.
Point of order.
Sorry, I have a point of order from Ms. O'Connell.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I'd just like to know the scope of the question, if it meets with the scope of this study, because we heard testimony that the witnesses said they had no contracts in regards to the infrastructure bank after 2020. So if Mr. Genis is referring to other contracts with McKinsey and the government, it'd be outside of the scope of this study. So can he clarify, is he referring to infrastructure bank contracts specifically and meetings around that? Because I think they clarified their timelines, and I'd like to make sure we're on
Thank you very much,
scope.
Ms. O'Connell. I'll defer to the clerk and
So-
just ask for 1 minute of the committee.
So, Chair, can I just speak to the point of order briefly? First of all, I had a separate point of order, which was I wonder if you could remind the witness of his obligation to answer the questions that are being asked. But I can just assure Ms. O'Connell that the questions I'm asking are within the scope of the study, and they're about informing our understanding
Sorry, Mr. Genis,
of.
I'll defer to the clerk as to whether or not it's.
Well, I just wanted to speak
quickly,
to.
and I'll ask for the indulgence of the committee as I defer to the clerk for 1 minute. Thank you. So we're going to rule that it is indeed within the scope. Mr. Genis is indeed speaking to the activities of McKinsey. With regards to your point of order, Mr. Genis, I will say that the witness is providing an answer. Whether or not it's a satisfactory answer to you is your opinion, but he is not in any way disrupting the activities of the committee, and he is responding to your questions.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I suppose fundamentally it's up to the public. Mr. Pickersgill, I want to also ask about your relationship to the government's Advisory Council on Economic Growth. What role did you play supporting the work of the Advisory Council on Economic Growth?
Mr. Chair, when the Advisory Council for Growth was stood up in 2016, they approached McKinsey to see if we provide pro bono support, and I helped lead that team and coordinate our expertise from around the world.
Mm-hmm. So you were at the same time supplying expertise, analysts to the Growth Council as you were participating in meetings that had as their objective presenting McKinsey's prospective ability to provide the government with products and services.
Mr. Chair, I don't think that's an accurate characterization.
What would be an accurate characterization then?
Perhaps because there may be some confusion on the role in the Growth Council. I could just spend a moment and describe what we did and were asked to do by the 14 members of that advisory council.
Sorry. No, I don't want a filibustering of my scarce time. What I'd like to know is, you know, and members know I know something about that. So the issue here is you were providing, in my understanding, advice to the Growth Council. You were bringing analysts to the Growth Council, and you were also bringing analysts to the government in what were effectively sales meetings. And in the process of facilitating those sales meetings, Mr. d'Entremont referenced your work with the Growth Council. So you were doing both of those things at the same time. Is that correct?
I don't believe that's a fair characterization. McKinsey provided neutral facts, global case studies as input to a group of Canadians who were meant to make recommendations. We don't recommend
policy. And that's
policy,
the Growth Council.
And that's in 2016. And
you were providing information there, right?
And I believe you're
and Mr.
d'Entremont
was facilitating meetings with analysts, right?
Yeah. Mr. Mr. Chair. So I just want to clarify, McKinsey's role was to provide neutral facts and caselets for input into a group of individuals, not the Canadian government, to give advice.
That's fine.
2016.
But on the other side, you're supposed to stop my time during points of order, Chair. I have a minute left, I believe. Could you clarify? Were you providing those analysts to into those pitch meetings, and were they the same people in some cases?
Meetings with McKinsey, I think you're referring to 2020. We're following the government rules. In 2016, we provided neutral facts into a set of advice.
I think I've established the point, and you haven't really contradicted it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jennis, and thank you, Mr. Pickers-Gill. And just to clarify, Mr. Jennis, I did indeed stop your time during the point of order, and it was verified by the clerk, which I do for all members when there's a point of order put forward at this committee. Next, we have Mr. Chahal. Mr. Chahal, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the witnesses for joining us today. We have heard a lot of criticism from opposition members about the role of the Canada Infrastructure Bank and that it hasn't completed any projects. Ms. McKenna, if I can go to you first, the importance of your work as infrastructure minister and for the province of Alberta, you touched on in your opening remarks that there was a large irrigation project brought forward. Can you talk about the importance of that project for Albertans and for the farmers, and the importance of irrigation in Alberta, and the impact that this investment would have made and will bring forward for Albertans?
Thanks. And that's a really great question. I mean, probably it's best to put it in the words of the former premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney. He was a big supporter of the Canada Infrastructure Bank, even as a conservative, because he believed in the importance of getting more infrastructure built, including in Alberta. So this is a massive irrigation project. I mean, obviously the bank is better placed to go through the details of it, but this is what Premier Kenney said. He said, "This historic investment in irrigation infrastructure will create thousands of jobs and support Alberta's economic recovery while strengthening our competitive advantage. Agriculture is the beating heart of Alberta's economy, and as global demand for agri-food products continues to grow, our producers in irrigation districts will be better positioned to meet that demand for generations to come." So this is really about supporting farmers, supporting irrigation. It could not be more important. And I do want to offer, my I guess, I'm going to say condolences, but I know that there are major forest fires that are right now that are going across Alberta. So as we see with the changing climate, I mean, we're going to have to rethink things. Water irrigation is going to be incredibly important. Canada is a major agricultural producer, as is Alberta. So I think these are really important projects, a great example of an infrastructure project that will make a real difference in the lives of people, including farmers.
Thank you for that. And I want to go to Mayor Sohi. Mayor, thank you for joining us today. You talked about the partnership between all levels of government and the private sector in your opening remarks. And I know as mayor, and you have a tremendous amount of work and infrastructure requirements. I know the city of Calgary's got some zero emission buses. The city of Edmonton also has a huge investment as well. Can you talk about the importance of that investment for the city of Edmonton, and if that could have happened without the infrastructure bank partnering with municipalities? And you're on mute.
Sorry, Mayor Sohi, I believe you're on mute, good sir.
Yeah. So broadly speaking, municipalities are still facing a huge infrastructure deficit. Yes, over the last number of years, in partnership with the federal government and here in the province, we are trying to close that gap, and it is being closed. Federal investments into Yellowhead expansion are making a difference. Federal investments in expanding the LRT system in the city, some of the trade corridors improvements in Edmonton, again, federal, provincial, municipal partnerships. So it's very important that we continue to explore partnerships and create ways of unlocking and investing into infrastructure to close that gap. We have an ambitious goal of electrifying entire fleet for our public transit. That's close to 900 buses, and Canada Infrastructure Bank was helpful for us to initiate that work, and we look forward to that partnership in the future. We also have a huge need in retrofitting our old buildings to better energy standards, as well as repurposing them maybe for housing, to meet their housing infrastructure gap. So I think there's a role for the Canada Infrastructure Bank to play in that area. We have a huge issues around flood mitigation because of climate change, and there's been federal investments in that area, but we look forward to working with the CIB in that as well. There's a lot of potential for municipalities to tap into the billions of dollars that are available that we don't have. Like as a municipality, we don't have the resources. We have very limited borrowing capacity, and so that's what we want to focus on.
Thank you very much, Mayor Sohi, and thank you, Mr. Chahal. Prochainement, nous avons...
Next, we have Mr. Barcelot Duval. You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Earlier, I talked about the $9.6 million contract that was given by Minister Sohi, when he was Minister of Infrastructure, to McKinsey. And that was to develop a national infrastructure strategy. I wanted to come back to that because Mr. Pickersgill and Mr. Palter, you said that your involvement with the BIC really didn't involve setting up the bank, even though you provided pro bono counsel to the Growth Council. Really, your involvement was limited to the 3 contracts. And yet, my colleague, Ms. Lewis, earlier quoted something that McKinsey said. And they said, we have in-depth knowledge of the Canada Infrastructure Bank and the important context around it. We clearly understand the objectives of the Infrastructure Bank thanks to our work with the bank. Now, that was said in a submission they made in March of 2018. So before these 3 contracts that we've been discussing, you had already worked with the Bank of Infrastructure, the Infrastructure Bank of Canada. That's what I understood. So I'm just trying to understand how, you have this $10 million contract for a national infrastructure strategy, but in that you didn't discuss the Infrastructure Bank of Canada at all, even though it has $35 billion of public funds. This isn't a $5,000 contract we're talking about. This is a $10 million contract. It's a big one. So you must have had some contact with the BIC on this. So did you forget to tell us something earlier?
So, Mr. Chair, I will confess we have never done any work with the Ministry of Infrastructure of Canada. So the $9.6 million contract, I actually don't know what it refers to. And as I stated in my testimony at OGO, McKinsey doesn't do policy work, and this would sound like policy. So I'm surprised to hear that there's a contract of that nature because we would not have taken that on in accordance with our risk management policies.
Merci beaucoup, Mr. Barcelot.
Thank you, Mr. Barcelot.
Palter. Next, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have two and a half minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So McKinsey informed the investment criteria of the bank, and we've heard that already. There are concerns about a conflation between the public interest and the private interest when it comes to the P3 model. We've heard that already. So I think it makes sense to pressure test some of the assumptions and conclusions that the bank made with regard to the public interest. And so my question is for Ms. McKenna. Aaron Corey, the CEO, said about the Lake Erie Connector project, quote, "This project will allow Ontario to export its clean, non-emitting power to one of the largest power markets in the world." As minister, did you ever see evidence that Ontario had a surplus of clean power to export? Oh, she left. Yes. Anyone else? Okay, I'll move on to a different question. I'll go back to Mr. Cartwright. Mr. Cartwright, I'm wondering, this discussion is really about two things. It's about McKinsey's role, and it's also about this balance between the public interest and the private interest. And we've heard some innuendo and assertions around, potential conflicts of interest, that sort of thing. But stepping aside from that, I wonder what McKinsey's central role in the Canada Infrastructure Bank says about the balance of public and private interests in these investments.
Well, I don't share the attitude of some members of the committee disparaging McKinsey. I think this is something that there's what we call corporate capture in the Council of Canadians, where think tanks, lobbyists, others who represent Bay Street, who represent sometimes global finance capital, have taken public policy and shifted it dramatically. The reality is there's no such thing as free money. Somebody doesn't come along and give you $26 billion for free. There's strings attached. They want a huge return on investment. There's a surcharge they get, but most importantly, there's a deficit of public accountability and control when you move to P3s. So we're happy to hear that where the bank is invested directly with municipalities, directly with Indigenous communities, that's what we say is the proper role. And that role is defined by responding to this climate emergency in front of us. We sure want the bank to stay away from water. The one time they tried to do that, the municipality backed away. We don't want any of that. But we need to retain and regain control of public assets and public services fully in the public good and not have that distorted by corporate interests and money swirling around the globe, interfering with Canadians' future.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Mr. Jennis. Mr. Jennis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. So here's what I think is going on. McKinsey's sales process is selling without selling. That's well known. That's been in various books written about McKinsey's process. McKinsey analysts, past and present, have talked about this, about selling without selling. Which means that McKinsey does not advertise in the sort of crude sense of it. They pitch themselves as experts in certain areas. They meet with clients to talk about their expertise and their ability to perform certain tasks. And the goal of those engagements is, of course, to be able to gather business. That is the sales process. And in many contexts, there's nothing wrong with that sales process. The problem is that on the government side, this has amounted to lobbying without lobbying. That is, McKinsey, self-identifying experts, meet with government to share their expertise with the goal of doing business with the government and very successfully getting over $100 million in contracts from the government. But the sort of doublespeak of selling without selling or lobbying without lobbying masks the fact that this so-called pro bono work done through the Growth Council and other vehicles has been the effective equivalent of selling. It's given preferential access as a result of that engagement, and it's resulted in fact contracts that, according to the government's own press release, did not in every case follow the rules. And we have an ATIP showing that the process of effective pitching without pitching. So I want to zero in on this question of whether this activity constituted lobbying. Again, Mr. Pickersgill, were any of the people from McKinsey who met with the government in these various engagements registered to lobby?
Mr. Chair, we're not a registered lobbyist.
Okay. Nobody in any of these meetings from McKinsey was registered to lobby. Were any of these engagements registered with the lobbying commissioner?
The answer is no.
No. Okay. So you were engaging in what was effectively sales and lobbying activity, and you won't describe these as sales meetings. You won't describe these as lobbying meetings, and yet something happened that led to this massive spike in contracts with McKinsey, over $100 million over the tenure of this government. That seems like an obvious problem because the wording of the Lobbying Act, the requirements for impartiality in the awarding of contracts are not supposed to be gotten around with these sort of business lingo doublespeak, selling without selling or lobbying without lobbying. So I want to put to you that I think that's the problem. I'll just invite you if you want to respond to those points, but I do have one more question to get in before the end of my time.
Mr. Chair, as I testified at OGO, where these questions came up, a couple facts I'd like to share. McKinsey's contracts with the federal government are less than 0.5% of the federal government's spend on consulting. It's point number one. Point number two, 74% of those contracts and questions were awarded through a competitive RFP run by the public sector, scored independently, and evaluated by the public sector on their evaluation criteria. Third, by my own records as a leader of the Canadian practice, we lose 60% of the RFPs that we submit to the federal government. So if there's any question about the competitiveness of the process, I'm not sure that that's relevant.
Okay. I mean, I don't think any of that has anything to do with the issues I raised about being registered to lobby, about selling without selling, or about the preferential access issues. I have one more question that I want to get in the time, which is the Government of Canada currently part of a class action lawsuit against McKinsey over its role in the opioid crisis?
So, yes, they are. And as I stipulated at OGO, McKinsey has done no work on opioid sales and marketing in Canada.
The Government of Canada, in spite of everything that has happened in the relationship between the government and McKinsey, is now joining a lawsuit suing you, and your position is what? That in spite of paying over $500 million in compensation in the United States, you think there was no wrongdoing?
So as I said at OGO on these questions, McKinsey's settlement with the United States had no admission of wrongdoing. We did nothing illegal.
Yeah, but did you do something immoral?
No opioid marketing and sales work.
Yeah, it's my time.
Regardless, Ms.
But you're also not the speaker.
You can't hear. The interpreters can't interpret if there are two speakers simultaneously. So if the member would like to take his time back, I'm on a point of order. But I think, Mr. Chair, it's really frustrating.
We need to ensure
for
that we're providing all of the time necessary for our interpreters to be able to hear what's happening, what is being said, and interpret it, and also look after their health. So I would just kindly remind all members not to overspeak each other or the witnesses. Time is up, Mr. Jennis. Thank you very much. We'll go with Mr. Badaway as the final slot for today. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Chair, I'm not going to be distracted or waste anybody's time in this room by the use of political tactics or to manipulate a desired outcome by the opposition, attempting to fit, quite frankly, a square peg in a round hole. I will use this time to be productive and at least get something out of this study. With that, we'll focus on the business of government, in this case to expedite capital projects, capital investments, for example, infrastructure, to service Canadians with what they need, require to further personal, business, and overall lifestyle interests by leveraging, and I'll underline and bold that word, leveraging, and therefore mitigating a financial burden on taxpayers. Therefore, may I request, Mr. Poulter, that you elaborate, as you started to earlier with the questions asked by Mr. Iacono, with respect to, one, addressing and expediting work needed to be completed to lessen the infrastructure gap within all levels of government and the responsibility that they otherwise have to try and do same, to then therefore provide those services for our residents while mitigating the cost to those taxpayers at every level. To that, how it mitigates the financial burden on taxpayers, once again at every level, whether it's through financing debt through operating, whether it's through capital investments, lessening the debentures, and the list goes on. 3, leveraging the development of economy to encourage economic growth within all sectors. And of course, 4, including climate adaptation. Mr. Poulter.
That's a lot of territory to cover. This committee today has spent a lot of time talking about financing of infrastructure projects, and that's an incredibly important topic. But financing of infrastructure projects, particularly greenfield infrastructure projects, and really we're talking about greenfield infrastructure projects. Let's not talk about privatization of brownfield. Let's talk about greenfield infrastructure projects, because that's really what CIB is focusing on. Financing is just part of the puzzle necessary to get greenfield infrastructure built. Obviously, the financing pays for construction workers. It pays pays for steel, pays for aggregate, pays for technology. A nexus of things have to come together to get a greenfield infrastructure built. You have to have siting, permitting, environmental reviews. You have to have land, rights of way, expropriation, community support. All of these pieces need to come together in the same place at the same time to actually successfully put a shovel in the ground. Financing is just one part of the puzzle. And I do think it's important that we as Canadians and the government think about this intersection
Business.
of these pieces, because solving one doesn't solve the problem. You've got to solve all of them simultaneously if you want to achieve the objective of building more greenfield infrastructure. And this is not a unique problem to Canada. This is a problem that infrastructure governments trying to build infrastructure in democracies around the world are wrestling with. So I think that's your question on speed. Risk. The nature of greenfield infrastructure is risk pricing and risk transfer. Who is going to take siting risk? Who's going to take development risk? Who's going to take construction risk? Who's going to take operations risk? What's the price of that risk? What's the duration of that risk? And all the participants in a project bear some element of risk. Private funds seek a return for the risk that they're taking on. The market clears, though. If the risk is exorbitant, the deal doesn't get done. If the return is exorbitant, the deal doesn't get done. And so there's a role for market participation in understanding and pricing risk. Is it perfect every time? No, it's not perfect every time. Sometimes it does go wrong, and I wouldn't sit here and say it happens perfectly every time. The economic benefit, look, there are many academic studies that have looked at the economic benefit of infrastructure, and it depends on the type of infrastructure. Roads can have a reasonably high GDP multiplier, transmission lines slightly lower. Some infrastructure projects can have significant front-end job creation opportunities and then lesser operations opportunities, and vice versa. Every project needs to be viewed uniquely and independently in the context in which it's being delivered to ask what is the economic and job creation benefit of that project. But by and large, the academics and the economists would concur that infrastructure is a net positive for economic growth and job creation. I don't think I've got your climate question yet.
Well, and that just leads me to my final comment, Mr. Poulter, and you confirmed the need for that involvement. I know in my region in Niagara, we're really building upon our strength, which is a trade corridor, which includes the Welland Canal, the St. Lawrence Seaway, road, rail, air. And those very investments that you're speaking about and those partnerships and that leveraging that you're speaking about is critical to then therefore expand the actual direction that we're taking with respect to the investments that need to be had, and then therefore the capacity that we will then have to be recognized as a national trade corridor. So I thank you for that validation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Badaway. So, colleagues, we do have 10 minutes left, or 8 minutes left, actually. Is there a desire for colleagues to each get perhaps 1 minute per party for one final question? If not, we'll conclude it there. But I just want to see if there's any general consensus. Mr. Bachrach, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. All right, so what we'll do is we'll go one more round, one question per party. And I guess we'll begin that line of questioning with Dr. Lewis, followed by Ms. O'Connell, followed by Mr. Barcelou-Duval and Mr. Bachrach. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours for one question.
Okay, so the bank's creation was recommended by Dominic Barton while he was CEO of McKinsey. McKinsey strikes an advisory council, works for free to set up to help the CIBC set up. McKinsey executives are stacked on the CIB. In fact, McKinsey recommended consultants that the CIB should hire. McKinsey receives what looks like 5 contracts. They say it's 3. There's dispute about that, totaling $1.6 million. McKinsey informs the CIBC how much they about the $10 billion growth fund, and then McKinsey brags about its special knowledge and procurement that it has of the CIB. Why should Canadians believe that McKinsey is independent from the CIB?
Mr. Chair, I'll start. McKinsey did not create the Canada Infrastructure Bank nor invent the concept. That was an act of government and a part of the Liberal Party's election promise in 2015. Our work formally started after following procurement rules that asked for expertise on specialized topics with respect to infrastructure that ran through a procurement process that, as we heard the other day from Mr. Corey, was competitive. We've done no work since 2020, and the fact that we have some former colleagues who used to work at McKinsey more than 10 years ago has no real relevance to us. Our work is focused on 3 engagements in 2018 and 2020, work we're proud of, and work that we believe was procured properly. That's our role with the Canada Infrastructure Bank.
Thank you very much, Dr. Lewis, and thank you, Mr. Pickersgill. Next, we have Ms. O'Connell. Ms. O'Connell, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just following up on that summary, it's the Canada Infrastructure Bank that engaged with McKinsey, correct? Not the Government of Canada.
Correct.
And was there any involvement with the Government of Canada with your role and work on those 3 contracts with the Infrastructure Bank?
No.
So, to summarize, you had the so-called employees that you had provided when asked names to potentially work at the Infrastructure Bank were not hired. You had 3 contracts with the Infrastructure Bank that was engaged by the bank in their own processes with the board and that procurement process. There were the employees currently that had previous employment with McKinsey, never engaged with McKinsey since working at the Infrastructure Bank. Is that correct?
Correct.
We've heard this testimony over and over, but as you can see by the opposition, there seems to be this attempt to not only discredit your organization without, I don't understand any reason. We even heard testimony that it's my understanding McKinsey did work, with the Canadian government under previous governments as well. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did you ever do work while it was Prime Minister Harper was Prime Minister?
Correct.
Oh.
We'll end it there. Thank you, Ms. O'Connell. Monsieur Barcelou-Duval.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we look at the federal government's use of consultancies recently, you can see that there's been an explosion since the Liberals came to power. They use consultants more and more. Simply in the case of McKinsey, we're talking about over $32 million in contracts in 2021. So there's real growth between 2015 and 2021. How can you explain that your services suddenly became so essential to the federal government?
So, in response to the question, I'll refer to a number of the points I made in my OGO testimony at the end of March. McKinsey's work with the federal government came about as a response to RFPs that the federal government asked us to respond to. Those were competitively offered, procured, evaluated independently by the government. As I said at OGO, the complexity of the challenges facing the government grow every single year, and the government is looking for global expertise on how others have dealt with those challenges, and we are able to bring that expertise to support the government on fulfilling its agenda.
Thank you very much, Mr. Palter. Merci, Mr. Barcelou-Duval. And finally, we have Mr. Bachrach. Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours for 1 question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Cartwright, we've heard several times this assertion that there simply isn't enough public money to invest in all the infrastructure that we need, and it never really goes contested. So I'm a little bit interested in your thoughts on that. Obviously, there are limits, but we don't talk about what those limits are, and we know that the federal government can provide financing at much more affordable rates than the private capital has access to. But my question is around the fact that not only are we talking about privatizing types of infrastructure that have traditionally been public, there are also cases in which this federal government is investing vast sums of money in infrastructure that has traditionally been private. I'm thinking specifically of $30 billion being invested in an oil pipeline that the Auditor General has said isn't going to make us any money. In fact, it's going to, result in the government leaving a lot of money on the table and losing money on that investment. Is there an opportunity cost involved there? Could those $30 billion be better spent on resolving the infrastructure deficit that so many communities face across the country?
Absolutely. That purchasing of a pipeline was just such a grossly wrong decision. Listen, there's been repeated here time and time again that somehow this is going to ease the burden on the taxpayer, this P3 model. This is complete nonsense. If there's $1 billion project and you've got a P3 model where the private guy is expecting 10 to 15%, the taxpayer has to find another 100 to 150 million tax dollars to pay those people for their role. And that is a talking point that has been developed as part of this corporate capture of public policy making. We need to assert that the public good is only served when public assets are kept in our hands and are publicly accountable. Where the infrastructure bank can invest directly in those things in municipalities and with Indigenous people, great. Give money to companies that are making billions across the world and is a terrible waste. But if we simply reverse some of the corporate tax cuts that have been brought in by this government and previous governments in the last 20 years, we'd have over 80 billion extra a year to invest in public infrastructure. And those are the solutions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Cartwright, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. That'll conclude our line of questioning for today. On behalf of all members, I want to thank our witnesses who joined us in person or virtually. And with that, this meeting is adjourned.